Are doctors greedy, or are we the victims of a broken system? I'm Dr. Lauren Kosinski and the founder of Metamorphosis Medicine, and this question is right up my alley. It's just the kind of thing that I like to think about and talk about because there isn't a simple answer and it requires looking more deeply. I'm reminded, well, first of all, there's been some kind of synchronicity going on this week because two very interesting things have been published, one from Don Berwick and the other a New York Times op-ed piece by a physician who's also a psychoanalyst. But in any event, what comes to mind when I start to talk about this idea is a conversation that I had with a really smart medical student over a decade ago who told me that the way that he regarded some of the financial situation that of doctors and medicine is of what happens when you have talent concentrated in a place and who arrays around that to profit from that ability. So that's one strain that I think does actually describe a lot of what's going on with the financial aspects of medicine and greed. Now, there's another element of this which is different from things like athletics, professional sports, which is that patients comprise a very deep pocket socially, culturally. This is a deep pocket because our value is that almost no amount of money is too much to spend to save a life. And so this is always in some tension in our financial planning and decision making in medicine and as a society. But that being said, I also have in mind an article that I read a couple of years ago describing the problem that a lot of politicians have who begin to assume, after they've been engaged in lots of vetting of wealthy donors and having very expensive events and um, having a lot of money move through, a phenomenal amount of money move through the political machinery to get an election, that they begin to think that they should be living the lifestyle that their donors live, and that this creates a tension that ends up compromising people's values about dipping into those funds in ways that are not allowed. So, in many respects, we have the same position when we look and see what kind of money healthcare administrators are making when we're providing the services on the front line that are underwriting that. And it's caused a lot of physicians to also think that it's legitimate to bolster our salaries in that system by recovering some of the so-called downstream revenue, which, in my opinion, I'm going to say this harshly, is a money laundering scheme. And it's just that the hospital's way of collecting some of that money hasn't come under the same scrutiny, or rules haven't been developed that prevent the charges for things that do exist when physicians charge directly. And this could be the subject of a whole other video in and of itself, but our willingness to look the other way and to take the money makes us complicit in that arrangement. And it's problematic for a lot of different reasons. But I think that the Shkreli Awards also read kind of like a peek and shriek. These are, I don't know if people know the Lown Institute, but it's kind of a hospital watchdog organization. And each year, I didn't know these were issued, these awards, but these go to both individuals and to organizations. And it reads like a newspaper tabloid. I mean, it's obscene. Um, so it's worth taking a look at, and I'll put the links down below. But the point is that both individual physicians and the organizations that we work for and that we're counting on to give us good salaries and to maintain an even keel for us engage in these practices. And on some level, we know it. And it's part of what's eroding our sense of our calling. And this was part of the content of a previous YouTube video, the first one that I posted, which is about the three pillars of medicine. And prosperity is an important piece, but out of balance, it's problematic. So this is Don Berwick's article, and it's worth a read because his analysis is sound, and he's an intelligent commentator, and he calls on physicians and all healthcare professionals to become noisier about the conflict between unchecked greed and the duty to heal, and indicates that silence is assent. But we've also endorsed some of the practices of our institutions by signing up and accepting the payments that were offered, where that are no longer tied just to our clinical productivity, but also to other expenses or revenue that's generated from things that we order in the hospital, or in whatever healthcare setting that we're in. But generally, the hospital has different reimbursement rules than clinics do. So, secondly, he says that healthcare professionals should insist that the guilds and trade organizations demote the pursuit of higher payment among their priorities. And I started talking with the American College of Surgeons about this in 2012, and I'll show you something about that in a minute. But one of the things that's been most difficult for me is that while we are in fact the victims in some ways of this system, we also keep perpetuating it by prioritizing financial return as the number one thing that we want our professional organizations to address for us. And finally, he concludes that healthcare should not be an engine for excessive private gain. That would apply to us, not just to the third-party payers or to hospital systems. Somehow or another, we have to come into a more correct understanding and balance for ourselves about what we want our return from this work to be. That's an open discussion, but it's really critical. And then the next thing was I was sent by several people this op-ed from the New York Times by a physician who's also an anthropologist. So he's somebody who's taking a bigger view, and it's fiery, and it's a call to action. It says that we have to say no to some of these things, and it talks about strikes. You know, one of the problems with physicians organizing, we all know, has been that it runs counter in a certain way to our attitudes about who we are and what we're available to, that we're not shift workers. But increasingly, we've moved towards that for financial reasons. And and perhaps this is an avenue. Clearly, there has to be a way for physicians to say no. Now, my personal approach to that has been to try to get each doctor one at a time to begin to shape a practice life that we love, and through that clarity to be able to say no. Because one of the things that's missing, in my opinion, from this editorial, which is fiery and is accurate, it paints a good picture of things, is that it doesn't really say how and why we end up compromising our values along the way, and what sustains that. I mean, I don't think that meaningful change is going to happen without that being an element of things. And as much as we want to look outside of us to shift blame to things, we actually have a very important role that we have been playing and need to play in a better way from the inside. And some of that means reckoning with our ideas about what it is to be a doctor, because honestly, doctors could go on strike, but what would we be striking for? There's not really total agreement about even what we should have, or what our profession is, or what our values and standards should be. So without that clarity, I'm afraid that this would be rather short-sighted. It would make a big splash, but I'm not sure that it would achieve in the long run this kind of foundational reassessment and change. And I'll point you, let's see, it's in this order, to this movie, which is, well, it says 2014. It's actually much older than that. That's when it started streaming. But it's a good depiction of taking action, kind of administrative action, in a joint way by physicians and nursing staff to argue against some financially and power protecting policies in a hospital. It's a French movie, but it's great. I'll put that in the link too. So when I applied in 2012 as really a dark horse candidate for the medical directorship at the Division of Advocacy and Health Policy for the American College of Surgeons, I really didn't want that job, because I think the American College of Surgeons has the potential to do a lot of good things, but getting any change of direction is like moving a ship. I mean, it's slow and it's impossible. But also, it was really clear that the candidates who would be considered and the person who was appointed are people who are completely well versed in compensation. That's it. And the points that I wanted to make are that erosion efficient position stature and identity should be addressed, that the evaluation of practice opportunities and alternatives in the changing work environment and reimbursement environment needed to be examined and promoted by the college to create more options than just going into employed positions and going down the path where we are now. And that also the disengagement of surgery and anesthesiology from the development and maintenance of operating room standards was problematic, because a lot of the standards that are issued are things that would form the basis for compensation and for compliance measures and things. And for us to bow out of that conversation is another way of abdicating responsibility for the work environment that we're in and then blaming other people for the outcome. So that was that. More recently, I also wrote to Dr. Hoyt about some problems that I see with seizure of control of the credentialing process and devaluation of surgeons' professional judgment in qualifying and supervising other surgeons, even in academic settings, and that risk-averse corporate and non-medical administrative leaders are unchecked by us. So this is a conversation that is both personally and professionally familiar to me and important, but we ourselves, through the agendas that we set in our professional organizations, perpetuate some of these problems. And so this is why I do this, because I think it's vital that we have some ways to participate that speak more to the archetype or to the underlying psyche, motivations, and inspirations of being a doctor, because there's a huge amount of power there. And I'll just close by making a distinction that I make over and over again, but I think it's important and useful, between healthcare, which is an industry, and it may have as its core concern medicine, but it is not medicine. Then there's medical science, which also has medicine as a core concern, but is focused on a scientific model of assessing disease and treatment and delivering care. And it is strong, but it is not the only way to evaluate what transpires in and where the power in medical encounters is. And it has some limitations in terms of the model that's used for getting answers that reflect the complexity, even on a scientific and physiologic sort of level. And then there's medicine, which is archaic and almost instinctual and archetypal, and is something that we see as a carrying function in human culture for as long as there's been human culture, and even in animal society. So this is a very primal thing that we're connected to and that has meaning for us. And when we're separated from it, bad things happen inside us, inside our profession, and with our patients and society. And I believe that that's some of what we're seeing. So if you'd like to be part of this conversation, there are lots of ways to do that. And if you want to just listen in and have somebody else say things, I am inspired to try to find ways to harness what matters to us on this level and to address ourselves in deeper ways so that we can engage and we can help to change the shape that things have taken. And I look forward to talking with you in one or another of these settings.